diagram. So in the question, you're given this Voronoi diagram here, and each point is labelled as a restaurant. And the first part of it is that the person that the question is about, Eleanor, wants to eat at the closest restaurant to her, and we need to write down which is the closest if she's at the various points. So the first one is at coordinate 2, 7. So if she's at 2, 7, we could mark this on our paper, then she would be around here, and therefore the closest point to her would be B. So for the first one, A part I, the answer is B. And then for the second part, she's at coordinate 0, 1, which is here, and therefore she would be closest to restaurant A. Okay, it does then say when restaurant A is closed, so we now need to find out which one she's closest to. So it must either be F or B. So we need to find out the length of both of those points to see which one she'd be closest to if A is closed. So we can't use A. And the distance to F is going to be 5 units. Okay, we can see it's just a horizontal line. The distance to B is going to be 5 units up and what looks like 3 units across. Now we don't even need to do Pythagoras to see that it's going to be bigger than 5. Okay, we know that the hypotenuse of a triangle has to be larger than the two sides, and therefore it has to be bigger than 5. So it must be closest to coordinate F. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of this part for the next part of the question. So it now says that restaurant C is at coordinate 7, 8. So this is 7, 8. We can label that on our diagram. And that restaurant D is at 7, 5. So that's this point here. And we need to find the equation of the perpendicular bisector between C and D. So C and D is just here, and we can see that they're both on 7 for the x coordinate. And that means that the perpendicular bisector will have a gradient of 0 and be cutting through the middle just here. So we want to find the middle of the middle of the 5 and the 8 on the y-axis, which we can see is 6.5. So the equation is just y is equal to 6.5. We can see that it is a horizontal line for the perpendicular bisector. So I'm just going to get rid of this bit. And the next part of the question, so part C, says that restaurant B is at coordinate 3, 6. So this is 3, 6. And we need to find the equation of the perpendicular bisector of BC. So for this one, it's not going to be quite as easy because it's not a vertical or a horizontal line. So the first thing we need to do is find what is the gradient between B and C. So the gradient, if I do my working down here, the gradient of BC, and make sure that you're labeling all of this correctly, is going to be, if we, so it's a change in y, so from 6 to 8, which is 2, and then it's the change in x, which is from 3 to 7, which is 4. So we can see there that the gradient is 1/2 between B and C. And that means that the perpendicular gradient between B and C is equal to -2. So the first mark is for actually calculating that. So there's one mark for finding the gradient or for using this formula, and then there's one mark for finding the gradient of the perpendicular rather than the original. And then for the next part, we need to find where does it go through. So we need to find the coordinate of the midpoint. So the equation for the midpoint is just the average of the x and the average of the y. So for this one, we have midpoint of BC, and that's going to equal 3 plus 7 over 2, so the average of the x, and 6 plus 8 over 2, which is the average of the y. So the midpoint there is going to equal 5, 7. And now we can find what the full equation is. We know that it's y equals mx plus c. We know that it goes through the midpoint, which is 7 for y and 5 for x. And we know that it has a gradient of -2. And that then gives me my full equation. I need to find what is c. And if I type that into my TI-84, then I can go to Math, Numeric Solver, and I can see that the one side of my equation is 7, and the other side of my equation is -2, so the negative button, times 5, plus, and then I have my x value. So I'm solving, and that gives me 17. So if I go back to my question, I now know that c is equal to 17, and so the equation of the perpendicular bisector is -2x plus 17. So that's the answer for part C. Now that was worth 5 marks. 2 of them are for having the correct equation at the end. 1 is for finding the midpoint, so there's another answer mark here. And then we have the previous ones above as well. So that's part C. Let me just make this one a little bit smaller. There we go. And we now have the last part, which is part D. And part D says we need to find the point that is equidistant from B, C, and D. So the point that's the same distance from B, C, D is this intersection point here between the different bisectors. I know that this bisector is y equals 6.5, and I now know that this bisector is y equals -2x plus 17. So where they meet, that will be my intersection point. So for this one, you can do it on the calculator. You can either use simultaneous equations, or you can just type it into your graph. I'm just going to type them into my graph. So I have -2x plus 17 as one of my equations, and then the second equation is just 6.5. So y equals 6.5, and I can graph that information. Let's just check where the window is. So we can see by looking at the original exam question what we should be looking at. So we can go up to 8 on the x-axis, and 10 on the x-axis and 8 on the y-axis. And let me just go back in. Okay, there we go. And we can see there that we have the intersection points. So if I go second function calculation and intersection, then it's saying the first curve, which curve do I want, which is correct. And then the second curve is this one here. And therefore my intersection is at 5.25 and 6.5 for y. So I can now type that in, and that's my intersection point for the first part of D. And then the second point is to find the distance of that point from D. So I'm now finding what is the length of this line. I know this equation, this coordinate is 5.25 and 6.5. So again, I can form a triangle. Now I'm just going to draw that triangle a little bit bigger to make it easier to see. And I have this coordinate, which is 5.25, 6.5, and this coordinate, which is 7 and 5. So when I use my Pythagoras, I can see that I have 1.5 in this direction and 1.75 in this direction. And now I'm just using Pythagoras to find the answer. So 1.75 squared plus 1.5 squared, and I need to square root it all. And if I type that into the TI-84, then I find an answer of 2.30 to 3 significant figures. So for this one, we have an answer mark here, and a method mark for using the triangle or the Pythagoras. And then we have the final answer there. So the full question is finished, and we've done various different things with the calculator and without on Voronoi diagrams.